r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Lady of Hell. The Midnight Train Part 2, The Story of Compartment 18. I'm still alive, guys. I haven't slept for more than 24 hours now and the resulting headache is killing me, but believe me, my fate could be worse. I managed to find out more about some of the rules because let's be honest, some of them are vague as shit. And I met a few other passengers. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, maybe you should start with Part 1. Part 1. Let's start from the beginning, shall we? Or rather, let's start where we left last time. I want to mention that the story of Compartment 18 involves suicide as well as child murder, so maybe skip these bits if that's a trigger for you. The only indication that the sun had risen was that the shapeless blur outside the window was tinted in lighter colors now. At least time seemed to work fine here, even if I had no idea where I was. Well, aboard the midnight train, obviously, but not where the train itself was. I hadn't slept last night, of course, not after the incident with the hunter, so after I had calmed down a little, I had started to look around the compartment and found some cloths in the cabinet opposite of the bed. Some of them were my size and the rules didn't mention not to accept them, so I changed my rain-soaked cloths against these dry ones, so I wouldn't catch a cold. After the apparent sunrise I finally dared to leave my compartment for the first time. I only took the list of rules, my phone, with the ticket, and my wallet with me and left everything else behind, assuming I wouldn't need anything else. The hallway was empty and eerily silent. At first I didn't realize why this unsettled me so much until I thought that I should at least hear the faint sound of metal scratching against metal, where the wheels of the train were touching the tracks. And yet, there was nothing but deafening silence, even though the train was still moving at full speed. I knew that not all passengers would be nice and I was honestly scared to meet them, but at that moment I would have given everything to have another human being around me. I started singing, just the chorus of a random song that came to my mind, over and over again, to break the silence while I was walking towards the door that led to another wagon. I had no idea in which direction I was supposed to go, so I just turned left and walked. I passed another wagon with one compartment after the other before reaching one that actually had people in it. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about them. Until I made the mistake to look closer. One man was so tall that he almost hit his head on the ceiling, his limbs were a little too long and his torso a little too small. A woman looked emaciated, barely skin and bones, sickly pale and fragile looking, and she had a small mountain of candy in front of her, shoving one chocolate bar after the other in her mouth. Another man sat on one of the seats, looking at his hands and grinning like a madman, but in his mouth were no teeth. I didn't look at anyone else, just quickly averted my gaze and concentrated on the vending machines that were placed on the wall in front of me. One for drinks, the other two for snacks. Nothing inside was a sufficient breakfast, but I hadn't eaten since yesterday noon and at this point, I would have taken anything that's edible. I got myself 2 bottles of cola because I sure as hell needed something sweet now, a pack of peanuts, some chocolate bars and a pack of Pringles. I knew I would get a bellyache from eating all this with an empty stomach, but I'd rather deal with it than the nausea and lightheadedness the hunger was causing. Maybe I'd have to go to the dining wagon at some point, but for now the snacks would suffice. I grabbed all my stuff and made my way back to my compartment because even though I couldn't lock the door, I felt safe there. The thing that had clawed against the door hadn't been able to get in, as well as the hunter's prey, which was reassuring. The hunter got in, of course, but he hadn't been hostile, so maybe the compartment was my safe space in this nightmare. Also, that might sound mean but I didn't want to spend more time around these other passengers. Maybe they meant no harm, but the rules said that it was hard to distinguish the malicious passengers from the benevolent ones and I didn't want to take the chance. I was halfway through the wagon when I heard the screams. Someone banged against the compartment door I was just passing by, crying in agony and begging me for help. I could distinguish 2 voices and they both sounded very young, like children. My first instinct, of course, was to turn to the compartment door and open it to see what was wrong. The children seemed to suffer and I wanted to help them, to try and ease their pain somehow. I almost touched the door handle when I stopped. Don't enter compartment number 18, no matter what you hear from inside. I took a moment to check the number that was written in gold on the door and as I expected, I was standing in front of said compartment 18. Just to make sure, I pulled the rules out of my pocket and checked if I remembered the number correctly and yes, I did. The train was already trying to play its tricks on me. I carefully took a step back, while the children behind the door were screaming their lungs out. I suddenly felt a hand on my arm and I stumbled backwards, completely blindsided by the sudden contact. As I turned to face the person, I saw a woman about my age, with red hair and dark eyes, looking at me with a worried expression. "Sorry, I didn't want to scare you," she said. "I'm Lily." "I'm Amy," I answered after a few seconds of hesitation. That was absolutely not my name. I'd had a cat as a child, a beautiful calico with bright blue eyes, which somehow had managed to grow 15 years old despite being hit by a car twice. Amy had been her name. I just didn't think it would be a good idea to tell anyone on this train my real name, and Amy had been the first thing that came to my mind. Lily apologized again for startling me like that. "I thought you were going to open the door," she then said. "Don't worry. I'm not going to. I didn't want to mention my list of rules, it was nobody's business that I had them." "Good. You wouldn't have come out again." I glanced at the door, from where I still heard the children cry for help. "There are no children, right? They're just an illusion." Lily shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "No, they are real. They're just not alive anymore." It took me a moment to realize that I was listening to the cries of dead children. I could deal with illusions. What I couldn't deal with were screaming corpses. Especially children's corpses. I felt very nauseous again. "But how? Why?" I asked, drawing in a shaky breath. "I'll tell you. Come on, let's walk a little." She put a hand on my shoulder and guided me away from the cursed compartment. As soon as the screaming stopped, she started to explain. It happened in 1945, the day Germany lost the war. A man and a woman, and their 6-year-old twins. The man had been a high-ranked military officer. They had truly believed in the Third Reich, and when it fell, they lost everything. So they decided to kill themselves. Poison, that was supposed to be quick and painless. They drank it and gave it to their children too, but the twins didn't drink enough. They suffered for hours, banging against the locked door and crying for help, while their parents lay dead beside them. Nobody came for help, and they never forgave the people for letting them die in agony. They lure people in with their cries, and if someone opens the door, they let him suffer a painful death just like they once had. It's their way of taking revenge. I had been afraid of the hunter, or the conductor's reflection, or the thing clawing at my door. But this story did not only terrify me, it made me sick. I choked back the vomit that rose in my throat. Suicide was a topic that made me sick even on my better days, but in combination with the cruel fate of the little children, I felt like bending over and puking right onto the floor. "Are you all right, Amy?" Lily asked. "You look sick." That's the most horrible thing I've ever heard. My chest was too tight, breathing had become a little difficult. "Let's just talk about something else, okay? Are you human? I mean, no offense, but this train is a bit weird and I want to know what I'm dealing with." She chuckled at that. "Yes, I'm human, although I've been here for a while. I didn't buy a ticket, so the conductor doesn't let me leave." "You're stuck here?" Merely thinking about that possibility made me shiver. Trapped for eternity in this hellscape where seemingly everything wants to kill you might just as well be a fate worse than death. Lily smiled at me. "It's not that bad, honestly. Once you know what to avoid, it's pretty nice." I did not believe a single word. Even if I came as far as memorizing all the rules until I knew them by heart and avoiding all the dangers with ease, I would never call this place nice. It was a nightmare, and I was almost sure that Lily's words were a delusion, to keep her from going insane. "That's it," I said as we reached the door with the number 3. "My compartment." Thank you." "My pleasure," she replied. "See you around, I guess." I considered asking her to stay because she was nice and I kind of enjoyed her company, but I wasn't sure if inviting people inside would be a good idea. A little paranoid maybe, but that should be understandable, considering my current position. So I just told her goodbye and disappeared inside my compartment. I stayed there for a few hours, eating my snacks and playing on my phone to distract myself from Compartment 18. Although I had calmed down, the story had left an unsettled feeling inside me that made my thoughts return to the image of bleeding, screaming corpses I had created in my mind. The unhealthy breakfast made me sick, just like I had predicted, so I stayed in bed until my stomach didn't hurt anymore. Thankfully I brought my phone charger and the compartment has electricity, so I can keep the battery alive. Being trapped here is bad enough, but without a possibility to contact the outside world, I would panic even more. My mom sent me a message and asked if I wanted to come over, but I told her the same excuse as I told my boss. I was suffering a particularly bad flu infection and didn't want to infect anyone else. It worked. Of course she's worried now, but telling her the truth would only make it worse. She couldn't help me anyways. I left my compartment again in the afternoon, and there were 2 reasons for that. The first one was that I needed more food. I honestly considered going to the dining wagon for dinner, but I didn't dare. I knew what to do in which scenario, of course, but it still felt like an unnecessary risk. Maybe I'd try it tomorrow. Today, I would continue to live off chocolate and crackers. The second reason was that I wanted to find the detective. I had to find out if there were other things I needed to know about this train, things that my rules didn't mention. I suppose I could have asked Lily too, but the rules said I could trust the detective and didn't mention her, and I'm still not going to take risks. I had to go through 2 wagons, keeping my head down and scanning the passengers as discreetly as possible, until I found him. The description in the rules had indeed been accurate. He looked like he had jumped right out of an old movie. He was dressed in hat and trench coat, had dark hair and a beard stubble and cigarette between his lips. He was staring out of the window like there was something other than blurry colors to see. I walked up to him, but didn't dare to just sit beside him. I read a lot about inhuman creatures, and while I was sure most of the information was inaccurate, politeness seemed to be key in interacting with most of them. And even if that wasn't true either, it certainly couldn't hurt. "Hello," I said. "I'm Amy. May I sit down?" He turned away from the window to face me, looking at me with his almost black eyes, and nodded. Of course. Good start, I thought, and sat on the free space beside him. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm new here," I continued. He chuckled. "Figured that much. When did you arrive, kid?" "Last night. I found a list of rules in my compartment and they said that I can trust you, so I thought I'd seek you out. Please excuse me if that bothers you." "Stop with the apologizing," he interrupted me. "I won't bite your head off for a wrong word. I'm not a fae." I nodded quickly. "So can you help me? Is there anything else I need to know?" I handed him the rules and he glanced over them, then gave the list back to me. "Seemed to include all the important stuff," he said. "I wouldn't know what to add. Stick to that and you're safe, kid." It was a relief to hear that. The things on the list seemed manageable. "But why?" I asked. "Because I just had to. I mean, I get that I don't go outside at night because of the hunters. And that I stay away from Compartment 18 because of the ghost children. But what's the deal with this train in general? Why is it like that?" The detective sighed. "I don't know why it is. Why are you a human? Why is a wolf a wolf? I can't explain its nature to you, kid." "Then don't explain the nature, explain the result. What is this place? Please." "Be careful who you beg like that," he replied. "Some may call this a favor and ask something from you in return." I froze. "Are you?" "No," he reassured me and began to explain. "This train is alive. It has a consciousness, a will, and like all living things, it craves food. It feeds off life, so it traps passengers and their beating hearts fuel it." "I guess you can't die of old age here?" I asked. "You won't grow older. But you can still die, of course, because if the train likes something more than beating hearts, it's violently spilled blood." That explained why it kept ghost children and hunters around, as well as other murderous things. I heard tales of people who went to see the train driver. Apparently the driver's wagon contains a black, rotting heart in a metal ribcage with veins of flesh and wires. I don't know if this is true. All I know for sure is it needs life, it needs blood, and it attracts tragedies. "Do you have a ticket, kid?" "Yes." "Good. That means you can leave if you stay alive for a while. Just don't hide in your compartment and you'll be fine." I raised an eyebrow, confused by his last statement. "I'm sorry, did you just say I should not hide?" "Those who hide away barely make it out alive," he confirmed. "Don't know why. They think they're safe and then they break the simple rules. Open the door for the hunter's prey or give the false roommates their name. I guess the train doesn't like it when they try to hide." I felt my whole body grow cold. "What do I have to do?" "Walk around. Talk to passengers. Just don't lock yourself in, kid." I nodded. There went my plan to just lock myself inside my compartment and only come out for food until this whole nightmare was over. "Thank you," I told the detective honestly. Do you have a name?" He smirked. "Why would I tell you? You didn't tell me yours." He knew. I froze entirely, terrified of what would happen now, what the consequences for my little lie would be. "I'm sorry," I apologized quickly. It's fine," he interrupted me. "Clever, honestly, using a fake name. You never know what you're talking to. Continue that." "But what if others know too? They will understand. Don't bother." I nodded and stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Detective." He smiled. "No problem, kid." I walked away, my heart was racing and my head spinning. I had found out a lot and now I knew what to do. Although I didn't look forward to more interactions with the other passengers, I would do it if it kept me alive. I might be trapped here, but I had a ticket and that made the situation only temporary. I am not stupid. I know how that sounds, but I'm capable of following a simple set of rules, especially when my life depends on it. I'll give the train what it wants, but if it wants my violently spilled blood, it has to try harder, because I'm not going to break the rules. I will survive. I will return home. I'm going to try and sleep now, because staying awake that long certainly isn't healthy and I need to stay focused. Tomorrow I will visit the weeping lady in the back of the train. After that, we'll see. I'll keep you updated on how this nightmare continues. Until then, stay away from strange trains at midnight. You don't want to end up here.